Hi, I'm Dirk TD, creator of Paradigm Shift. If you'd like to check out my work, it's at paradigmshiftmanga.com. You're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by a returning guest. Now, I say a returning guest only because of two issues that occurred. One, I recorded his interview back in 2012 at one of the very first C2E2 comic conventions in Chicago, which is still an amazing convention. The issue was my sound guy didn't record the audio. So it is a null and void interview. So 10 plus years later, he is back on the show, and we are joined by the ever talented creator of Paradigm Shift, of course, Dirk Tiede.
Hey,
How are you doing today?
thank you. Thank you. Just by the way, it is Tiede, but
Thank you.
I never ever expect anyone to get that right.
Dirk TD joins the interview here
Yes.
today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to come.
Oh, no, thanks for coming by. I know your work fairly well because I've been following you for a long time. I've seen your evolution of your comic style and your evolution to a brand new venture, of course, with an animated series. I'm jumping ahead of myself, though. For those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking.
Absolutely. So I'm Dirk TD, and I'm primarily known as a comic creator. I'm known for this comic series, Paradigm Shift. It is a werewolf detective story. Got two massive volumes out of it. It's sort of been a labor of love for the last 20 years, and I'm now currently working on the first short animated film based on the series. We're going to get into talking about all that this hour, and that's why I'm here.
You know, when I first saw your comic series and back at C2E2, and I had followed you online as well too, because I had a list of over 4,000 webcomic creators back in the late 90s, early 2000s, because that's how many there were, if not tens of thousands more. But you've survived for 20 years. That's an amazing accomplishment itself. You stood the test of time with an amazing series with Paradigm Shift as well too. You were right next to, of course, Iron Circus Comics at C2E2 back then. So Spike has been doing incredible work with her own works as well too. Talk about, I know it's like 20 years and you guys are still around, which is incredible to see. And from your journey when you first started your webcomic to now, what has changed from your creative perspective and maybe the business itself?
Oh my God. I mean, when I first started, it was the late 90s. So, I mean, I first wrote the outline of what became Paradigm Shift in like 1998. So at the time, I'd seen like one or two other comics online, but there was no word for webcomics when I started. I knew how to make comics and I knew how to make websites. So I made a website and I put my comic on it. I hoped at someday to print a book. I hoped, or get picked up by a publisher or something. I just started putting it online because it was a place I could put it. I mean, over the course of starting that series, going into like what became the webcomics movement in the early aughts, joining Modern Tales, which was the first subscription-based comic site, like with creators like Gene Yang, who now has American Born Chinese on Disney Plus. I mean, or Raina Telgemeier, whose Smile series has been like just a perennial bestseller forever at this point. I mean, rubbing shoulders with people like that. And Spike and I were convention buddies for like 5 years. I mean, we exhibited at San Diego Comic-Con several years in a row together. We just went in on a small press table together. And now she's got Iron Circus Comics, and it's like she is like the Lackadaisy pilot that just came out, and just like she just continuously blows my mind that how far she's come with all that. And as I've just kind of keep coming back to working on my stuff as I can.
That's awesome. Yeah, 20 years is a long time in the industry, especially in comics itself here too. You've evolved since then as well. You've transitioned into animation and, of course, this short film, which I definitely want to talk about. I've been following you on Twitter and social media for a while as well too. So when I first saw your initial concepts of this amazing animation, I was like, wow, this is just incredible. Like, how did this come about and why did this come about and what are you using? Like, let's dive right into it.
Absolutely. Okay, so the reason it came about was I was over the pandemic, in just to lay groundwork, in 2019, 2020, I did a Kickstarter that collected like the 20 years of material for Paradigm Shift. And I had such a overwhelming response to it. I was like, well, clearly people like it, and I would love to finish the story. So over then the pandemic hit, and I had already started writing the script for the next storyline. And so it took about a year. I got like this massive tome. It's like a 500-page script. And I realized, oh my God, this is like at least 2 books or possibly an entire series. And so into 2021, I started working on the first issue. I was thinking, okay, well, I'll break it into issues, release it as issues, maybe publish it on the web after the fact once I get it out. Long story short, I crashed and burned on that first issue. I ran into total writer's block during the editing process. Just over a year ago, I decided I'd just put it down. It had occurred to me long ago when I first started the series that I would love to see it animated. I've always wanted to see it animated. I mean, half the reason I was like pushing into the comics industry was hoping that maybe it would get some attention and maybe somebody would want to turn it into a series, because I love movies. I love TV. It's half the reason I do comics is because it's easy to do by yourself. You don't have to have a giant team and whatnot. But fast forward 20 years, like suddenly the hardware is there, the software is there. I put this issue down and was like, I'm going to start. I've wanted to do like a 3D transformation of Kate, my werewolf character, since the very beginning. I dabbled with this software called DAZ 3D Studio, on and off, just to like as a virtual character reference, or just, to poke around. And so I kind of knew how the basics of character stuff worked. And I was like, I want to learn Blender. All right, well, let's see if I can like take one of these free models and modify it. And so like it became like a little side project about April last year. And fast forward about 4 weeks, I had a completely transformable version of Kate in this version of DAZ Studio. And I'd sort of learned Blender. I'd taken like a tutorial thing like the summer before. I'd never really, like, so I had the basics of the program, and I had done 3D stuff like way back in the day, but it's been sort of an extra tool that I can use, but it wasn't my primary thing. So I sort of like sat down and like just I was just totally obsessed with it. Just like learned how to like export models out of DAZ and bring them into Blender and then modify them, push all the points around, and then import the figures back into DAZ. So then I had like a little morph. So I had like the werewolf version and the human version. I could just do this little slider and it would transform and go whoop. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. And I was like, wow, what if I could like, but it was like realistic looking, DAZ defaults to sort of photoreal. And I was like, well, this kind of looks like Horizon Zero Dawn or Tomb Raider or one of those. That's kind of cool, but could I make it anime? Could I make it look like my comic characters? And so that was the next thing. I was like, okay, can I? So I brought that in. I started mushing around, and next thing I know, within a week, I had like an anime looking version of Kate, and changed all the shaders so it would look like cell shading. I started playing around with it, figure out how to do the lines, do the outlines, using a piece of software in Blender called Freestyle. And I was like, well, let's see if I can do the werewolf transformation. And so I spent a couple of weeks and did these tests, which I posted on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. They're out in the world now, but after I got that done, and this whole process from the beginning to having like this fully transformable model that looked animated, looked hand animated, took about 2 months. It was about 8 weeks or so. I was building off of skills that I already had, but like I love the technical side of creativity too. Like I've always been kind of a computer guy, is on top of being an illustrator and artist. And once I had that, I was like, I got to do something with this. So my initial thought was, well, maybe I'll make a little music video and I'll do the transformation sequence, and it'll be about 2 minutes long, and that'll be awesome. Like that would just be fun. And so I like made some sets and did some tests, and about July, I started work on what became the film. And what happened was I just got so into it that I kept having more ideas. So the next thing I know, I just started another scene and start animating it. And it was sort of like, using sections of the comic as storyboarding, but then I've come up with some new stuff to kind of tie things together so I could kind of put it together into this sequence. And by November, like I had 15 scenes. Like, and it come by the mid-December, I got the whole first rough of the whole thing done, and a friend of mine, Alexander Danner, who is a local Boston comics writer who now does podcasts. Has this long-running story podcast called Greater Boston, which my wife and I do music for. He brought us into like a recording studio last summer, and like we got to like record like in a real music studio. It was amazing. Anyway, I got to talking with him at Mice, which is the big independent comics show up here, and I was like, yeah, I'm working on this animated film, I'd love to talk to you about sound. And he was like, well, I'm doing a class on doing sound for film right now, and I need something for my final project. I was like, well, tell you what, I'll just send you what I got and see what you can do with it. And then in December, I was just finishing up the last scenes that I'd created, and I get this email with like basically 3/4 of my film with sound in it, including a friend who like does the voice of Kate as she's transforming. Wow. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. So using that, I like quick brought it all into Premiere and like put all the scenes in and brought a couple of music tracks that I had made like a year before that I knew I wanted to use that were going to be the basis of the music video. Edited, and so like about December 15th, I had the whole rough cut of the film, and it's 7 minutes long. It's like over 7 minutes of material. I was like, I have a movie. It's not ready, but it's the rough is there. And so I've basically, since January, I've been going back through each scene and cleaning it up. And I just finished the second to last scene.
Oh, wow.
So I will be done in about 2 weeks with all the visuals. And then I got to go back through and do the sound pass. Mm-hmm. So I'm meeting with the owner of a local brew pub this week, and we're going to nail down a time and date for the premiere. And I'm going to premiere it at the local brew pub because he's got a screen and a sound system, and I know him because I was actually just there this morning playing music. Yeah, wow. We're going to do a local premiere, and it's going to be awesome. And then I'm going to start submitting it to film festivals and talking to conventions and things about maybe showings around.
The overall time of your short film is what? Is it 7 minutes in total?
Yeah, it's about 7. It's about 7.5 minutes or so, minus the credits.
For a short film, that is respectable because it's usually 5 to 30 minutes for a short. So, I mean, you're set in a great time frame that you can easily hit those short film festivals, no problem. So that's what I do as well, too. I produce and I do all that stuff on the side compared to this, but it's just amazing. You're taking an amazing comic, you're putting in an animation. I'm thinking back to things like Scott Christian Sava's Dreamland Chronicles. I'm thinking back to Pam Harrison's, House of Muses. I'm looking back at all these old webcomics that utilize 3D anime or 3D models and things like that. And now we see paradigm shift now in animated form. Like, why not just lock it in and go the lackadaisy route and go a 2 hour or an hour and 20-minute feature?
Well, I have ideas. I certainly have ideas. I would definitely have to go. This I've managed to do all by myself, aside from the sound production. To do anything more would require a team, but I think that might be doable. Once the film's done, I'm going to start experimenting. There's a local art school I've been working with lately and getting to know some of the animation students. And so I'm going to be definitely setting up internships in the fall, possibly working with some of the recent grads on doing some like freelance work to see if I can work together on projects. Because I would love to do a pilot, kind of like the lackadaisy thing. Yeah. Even if I could get a small team of like 10 people, I think it would be very doable.
Yeah.
It must be a matter of like the organization part. I would have to become a director. So I'm used to working entirely by myself. But I think this is something I could definitely see how the little pieces could be farmed out to like, somebody who specializes in modeling, somebody specializes in character rigging, someone who specializes in modeling for like backgrounds, somebody specializes in compositing, obviously sound, that sort of thing. Like each of these are separate jobs. I'm wearing all the hats right now, but it would be very easy to be able to, like, as long as I found some people I could work with to like pass things off, and then my main skill set as a generalist would be as the director. I can envision it in a way that I've never been able to envision trying to like make a team out of doing my comics. It just doesn't really, that doesn't work.
The fact that you've done everything solo for 20 years, I'm sure it's difficult to let go of certain aspects and certain things.
Yeah. On the other hand, if you find talented people who do like, who are better at the thing than you are,
Then have at it. Yes.
I might be able to pry things out of my hands a little bit.
I'm with you on that. I completely understand. The flexibility of learning new software is interesting because it's about time management and it's about allotting your energy into, say, learning like Blender or that other software you mentioned, etc.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to 3D Studio Max when I used to do like architectural design and things like that back in the day as well too. But what is it about Blender that just made your process more complete, or how did you find the software when you were first working with it? I'm kind of curious from a
Well,
beginner to your current expertise status.
well, when I first started to play with it, I was looking for alternatives to SketchUp because I've used SketchUp for like 15 years at this point, but it's now paid.
Mm.
It's not free anymore. So I've been paying like the annual fee for it, which is, $300. It's not cheap, but it's not overly expensive either. I always have thought in 3D. I've used 3D packages going back to the mid 90s. So even things in PS, I build sets in 3D and use them to help speed up the background work these days. Like for at least since the end of part 3, like I've basically been using 3D models to like speed up that process. I was like, Blender, this has been around forever. It's free. It can do a lot. I'd love to learn a little more about it. Plus, I was over the pandemic, I was playing a ton of video games. Like I had not played anything in like 10 years, and I came back and like put Windows on my iMac and was like playing the Tomb Raider reboots
Yeah.
and going like,
Wow. Yeah.
like, oh my God, like video games got really good while I was away. It's like suddenly, oh, they have like decent stories now, and like Horizon Zero Dawn just
Oh.
completely blew my mind. It's just like, holy crap, what a great game! Like, so I was like, it'd be kind of fun to play with some 3D stuff again. So I did like a tutorial from a guy, Blender Guru,
Mm.
on YouTube. It was like a 20-part series, something. I just made a chair. That's all I did. I modeled a chair. But it taught me the basics of how the software worked, the difference between the different modes and how you basically move stuff around in it. And so I had sort of a basic understanding of how Blender worked. That was like 2 days out of my summer, a year and a half ago at this point. I do like learning new software. I like learning, especially when I have a project. But yeah, for this, it's because I had the project. I learned the software to do the project. Did tutorials when I ran into a stumbling block, like, okay, I'm working. How do I do this? Okay, over to YouTube, blah, blah, blah. Do a quick tutorial. Oh, okay, that's how it works. Go back, continue on in project. Like basically that's how I've worked for the past year. It's like I haven't been doing as much jumping into YouTube since 2023 hit, because I know more or less what I need at this point. Now it's just refinement. Although I did take a break in December and signed up for Blender Studio, which is their animation, like the Blender Institute has an animation studio attached to it, and they put out a short film every year, and they share all the assets. They share like tutorials. They like, so I it's like a paid thing, but it's like $10 a month to access all that stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, hell yes. And so I signed up for that and did a bunch of tutorials on that and learned a ton about like some of the more nitty gritty details about things like actual animation, doing walk cycles, doing like timing, stuff that I was just sort of winging for the whole first draft of the film, just using my sense of timing. I mean, also a musician, so I do have a sense of time. And my, even the comics, when I'm writing the scripts, it's like a movie that plays in my head. Characters move around, they move around, they talk, it's all in my mind's eye. So in some ways, doing the animation, once I had the figures all rigged up, I could just move them around and have them do what I want in a way that is pretty efficient. And then I have to go back and clean it up. But so basically, I just use a project to learn any new tool. It's always been that way. And then I just use my research to like help me when I run into a problem. How do I problem solve it? Google's your friend.
But it's good that you're using your time efficiently to do what you need. It's not like you're trying to do like a video game or something like that based off of, although technically you actually,
I mean, that'd be awesome, but no, like that is definitely something that would require a team.
right. Then how has music informed your creativity in terms of not only the comic, but of course with your short film?
Music is sort of my hobby. It's my outlet, that it's a creative outlet that isn't attached to my career. It's something that has no stakes attached to it. It's just fun. I mean, obviously there's elements of, I have like soundtracks or things that I'll listen to while I'm creating, and I have sort of a tonal sense of what, like if there was a soundtrack to a particular scene or whatnot, like I have a sense of like, oh yeah, this would be some like Nine Inch Nails style industrial thing here with the werewolf action. Like I know what that would sound like, but they've kind of been separate up until now. And then with the film is the first time I've been able to bring these two things together, where I have my stories and then I have my music, and I can actually put them together into a thing. There was some creative time in the last decade where I was looking to do other outlets other than comics, and I started painting, for instance.
Yep.
And then I decided to like really dig into doing guitar, and then I started recording things, and I was like, I would love to have a real bass, and so then I started playing bass, and like it's just a hobby. It's just a thing that I mean, I call them my joy machines. They're just things that make me happy. And also, like I said, I had a gig this morning. I play Irish and Scottish music on fiddle. So we host my wife and I host an Irish session. We were hosting a brunch like that we do twice a month.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, so it's more like the music is sort of a separate thing, but it feeds a different part of my creative soul. I've always done both drawing and music since I was a kid. I've always done both.
Everyone usually asks, what's the wisest piece of advice or what's the most bullshit piece of advice you've ever received? But what is the second wisest piece of advice that you've received that has stuck with you in your varying careers? And you can have it for either animation, comics, or whatever you'd like.
Oh, that is an interesting question. I can tell you all sorts of bad advice that I've gotten. All sort of things I've had to deprogram myself from. I mean, I think paying attention to how I feel while I'm doing something. Like it's something that I've had to like find my way into, and then I didn't. I think like you often hear follow your bliss, but I think if you take that at its literal sense, it's not actually that useful, because that can lead you down false paths, because there are plenty of times when you're doing the work and the work does not feel good, or there's a grind or whatnot, but that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. On the other hand, there's an underlayer to that, which is pay attention to how you're feeling over the course of a thing. And I do find when there's like that little voice that says, oh man, that would be really cool. And if I listen to it, every time I've done that, that has definitely led me to good things, even though there are times where I'm like right now, I'm in the grind part of, or as one of my coaches, Jessica Abel, says, I'm in the Khyber Pass part of the project, which is sort of just, it's that grind that you do to get to the end. And it's not to say that there aren't fun parts, because there certainly are fun parts, but when I have to like re-render the current shot that I'm on for the third time because I found something in the compositing process where I'm like, I clean that up. That's no good. Like yesterday, I spent all day working on one shot. And I just like, I mean, it is the final shot of the film, but so it needs to look good. But yeah, I was going back through and like fixing all these little tiny details, and it's like I can kind of zen out on the work like that, but it's not the fun part. But like the real fun part is the animating part. That's the really fun part where a character initially comes to life. So it's like the follow your bliss, but then there's like it doesn't always work out that way. But at the same time, like I have the feeling of working on the animation as a thing right now, and it is joyful. It is really joyful, even if like I am so sick of this shot right now. I'm so ready to have it be done, and then it's done. I'm like, all right, I get to work on the next thing, and that's why I've put out these little goofy parody videos the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I'm sort of in the grind part of doing the film, so I've like taken a few days and just done a stupid little, oh, here's a little parody of Sailor Moon's magical girl transformation as a werewolf, because I needed to just do something fun for a little, even though it was just a
But
thing.
but it's a great break though. Like you said, you can
Exactly.
yeah, you need to, you can't just focus on it 12 hours a day and then just sleep and then get back into it. It's just
Exactly.
not healthy creatively and bodily either. What was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Oh wow. These are deep questions. uh well, I can give sort of the negative example of that, where you internalize a piece of basically bad advice or negative self-talk. Although it's interesting. So I had a professor, when I was in college, and I went to art school and I got a degree in commercial art, and there was a guy who was like the long time professor. He taught painting and whatnot. And I remember him we were doing a, not a portfolio review, but we were like doing it was my junior year, and we were looking at my body of work. And I remember him like flipping through these drawings, and I was so burnt out. Now, if I look back and at the time, I was realizing, hey, this is going through a period where I was kind of depressed. But he was like, yeah, your work is weak and uninspired. And wow, did that bounce around in my head for nearly 20 years. And so like that's like a piece of negative self-talk that it took me a long time to realize, like, oh, I can trace that back to like one guy. I mean, he obviously was an important figure in my college experience, because he was sort of in charge of, part of my evaluation. But like wow, one of those cases where like you can put way too much weight on just a single phrase that somebody says, somebody who's important to you says, and you have to like be able to take a step back and go like, oh wait, I keep hearing that in my head. That's something this guy said. Well, why do I believe that?
Hmm.
And doing that process is what helps you unwind from it, and then not place so much meaning on it anymore. And then it just becomes like, oh yeah, it's that guy again. You can shut up, Marv.
Good times.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I'm now starting to work with students, and so now I'm very cognizant about what I say to them, and I try to be encouraging. At the same time, I also want to be realistic. I want to make sure that I'm giving them good advice, but I also know that those moments where that helped carry me through was when somebody who was important to me at the time said something, you know, very, not just complimentary, but meaningfully like encouraging. That those were the things that helped buoy me through those moments where things were not great.
We're informed by the people that have mentored us and who have taught us, and we've learned from our own personal experiences as well too. So it's not like, well, it is an open-ended question. It is something along the lines of everyone answers it differently. So your example for that instance, many have said something similar as well too. Others have thought back to a parental figure that have been that guiding post, etc. There are a variety of different ways you can approach it, as long as you can work through it and find your own resolution. That's the ultimate end goal, truly, no matter how it all started.
Absolutely. It seems like once you get past, like, here I'm in my late 40s, and I've been doing this for over 20 years, and realizing that like the last 10 years I've picked up all sorts of new skills, or built on skills that I had that got put in a freezer and resuscitated. And somewhere along the line, I had to realize, like, oh, the stuff that it's not my skills that are holding me back here. It's totally like my my headspace, my mind space, like where am I at? That's the sort of thing that, and so that's become the new game. Like, how do I get around that? And so like the animation is sort of a result of that, realizing, oh yeah, this feels good and I'm excited about this, and I think I need to keep exploring that.
Small victories. That's all we can hope for in life. Look
Exactly.
back at what we've done and go from there. And that's a great way. I like that. Is there a comic or piece of animation, either manga or anime or cartoons, that made you feel the way you hope people see this new animated work of Paradigm Shift feel?
Oh wow. I mean, there's several ones that I can think of, but like, I mean, while I could hope to give the impression that the Akira had on me the first time I saw it, I mean, given that was like I was a senior in high school and watching it in a friend's kitchen, and it was totally like a dub of a dub of a dub,
Yep.
totally bootleg copy. But I remember like just that completely blowing my mind and like going like, wow, you can make cartoons like this. I mean, obviously that was made from a giant team of really, really professional
Yeah.
people, and I can't say that my work that I've done in the last year rises to that level yet, but I can aspire. I can aspire. But I mean, I hope that somebody who watches this and sees the transformation, the werewolf transformation that I was the whole reason I did the whole thing in the first place. Like they go like, holy crap, that was awesome. That was really cool. Like I would love to have the effect that watching Akira for the first time, or watching the Ghost in the Shell movie, or I mean, one day I would like to be able to rise to the level of Hayao Miyazaki and having, bringing somebody to tears. But right now, I will settle for like, wow, that was really cool.
Well, I'm gonna say it. That werewolf transformation wasn't just cool; it was fucking awesome. I loved it.
Cool. And that's just like that's a
Small
couple of
taste.
slices. I mean, yeah, that's I have not shown it all.
Before I jump into my last four questions, fifth one is a fun one. Is there anything that I've missed you'd like to showcase those that are watching or listening to this
Oh,
interview?
for those of you who have never read Paradigm Shift before, please go check it out. You can read it at paradigmshiftmanga.com. I've got the whole story up there for now. Um, I still have people like go, hey, is there going to be more? Maybe eventually. Right now I'm working on a movie. But yeah, please go check it out. It's a werewolf detective story, and it's like a buddy cop thing that meets the X-Files, and in this like lovingly recreated manga form. So I hope you check it out. And then my movie will be out this summer. I'm looking at the end of June. It will be coming out soon. It'll be on my YouTube channel, DT Comics.
I used to do 2-hour webcomic interviews actually when I first started back in 2008.
Wow. I did one like that a couple of weeks ago with an old friend from Modern Tales who
Oh,
just
nice.
does live streams, and like we went on for like 2.5 hours. It was kind of awesome.
That's great. Those are good friends to have. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
I would have to say my mentor in college. His name was Alan Thursby, and he ran a video production company in the town where I was going to school in Decatur, Illinois. I was going to Millikan University, and a friend of mine at school said, hey, I know this guy through my synagogue. He's looking for an intern. I thought of you. Why don't you give him a call? And I did. And he was so warm and kind, and he welcomed me into what he was doing. He had this whole video production set up in a small office, and he basically just turned me loose with all the stuff. Like, I mean, this was like 1995, I want to say, and he had a whole like nonlinear video editor set up with a maxed out Mac, and it was hooked up to this whole video editing suite. And I'd never seen full res video playing on a computer before. It was like, oh my God. And then he turned me loose with like Adobe. It wasn't even Adobe After Effects. It was like After Effects version 1. And he just like let me learn all this stuff. And then the next thing I know, I was like doing graphics for like industrial videos. They weren't exciting, but the fact that I could do like this animation stuff and actually it was going out in the world and doing something was really, really inspiring. And he really built up my confidence in a way that I would not have had otherwise. Like he was appreciative of what I did. He was hands off in a way that let me like learn new things in the style I needed to learn, but he was also like helpful and give guidance, and then just welcomed me into his world. And just, he didn't talk down to me. He would just let me do what I was doing in a way that helped him. I don't think that I would have gotten through my young adult experience is coming away as confident and with a sense that I could do that. I could do the things that I wanted to do if I hadn't had that experience. He went on to like hire me for the summer part-time, and then I ended up working for him all the way through the rest of my time at school, and it was just an amazing experience. I don't think I would be the same person if I hadn't had that.
From a professional standpoint, you have been in the comic industry for over 20 years, creating the amazing paradigm shift as well too. And the fact that you now have a very amazing and incredible short film is amazing to see as well. So congratulations on both of those amazing accomplishments. Professionally, you're successful in that regard. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
That's a good question. I think if you had asked me that 5 years ago, I would have said no. But now I realize like I have the best gift that I could ask for, which is I have time to work on whatever I want. And while Paradigm Shift may not have gotten like any awards or picked up by a major publisher or anything, like I published 6 books at this point. I mean, given they're, one's a compilation, but I mean, I've self-published a bunch of books. I'm now working on a short film, and my time is my own. And while the comic itself has never made tons of money, it's always paid for itself. When I really think about that objectively, I have to say, yeah, I mean, if I was just getting out of school, like say the mentee I'm going to be working with this summer, and looked at myself, I would be like, oh my God, I wish I could do that. I could be that guy. But 5 years ago, I don't think I was in that spot. I don't think I would have like realized, I don't think I would have had the perspective to realize like, oh wow, I've managed to get to this point. Now, obviously, I've had plenty of help along the way. This was not a case of me going, and look, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do this without my wife. I wouldn't be able to do this without my friends, my family. I mean, obviously my readers. In the end, like, what else could you ask for as a creative than to be able to like work on the projects you want to, have them pay for themselves, not be like burdened down by a lot of debt, and have a nice life? How is that not success?
You're still alive. That's the main thing too. So
Alive and healthy, and
yeah.
Now I'm going to the gym. The pandemic kind of put the boot in my butt to go and start getting in shape.
Yeah, we're not getting any younger, that's for sure.
No, I can see. I just turned 48, so
Oh,
I can see 50 coming up over the horizon and going, you know what? I want to make sure that I'm as in good a shape as I can be as I go into my 50s.
the reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
Well, I mean, it depends on the failure. There are times where it has felt like 2013. I was in a bad spot, and I kind of curled up and I disappeared for a while. And for me, when things are not going well, that's usually when I turn off the social media and I kind of go do something else for a while. But at the same time, the other way of dealing with failure, I mean, sometimes you just need a break, and then the other times it's just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and try again. Like I've had to do a lot of that kind of thing over the course of working on the film. Well, I'll run into some problem and I'm like, what's going, like that totally didn't work. How am I going to fix that? And in which case, like I just redouble my efforts. I try something different. There's no really one answer to like dealing with failure. I think in the end, I guess if I had to boil it down to one thing, I'd say be kind to yourself, because everybody fails. And in fact, failure is where learning comes from. Like if you sailed through life getting everything right the first time around, you might not actually know what it was that you did in order to pull off what you've done. And sometimes I think failure is the way that we actually learn the best lessons, even in times where I felt like, oh, this isn't working. I don't know if I'm ever going to do comics again or whatnot. That really ended up being an opportunity to try some other things. In which case, 2013, that's kind of when I started playing music again, like more seriously. That led to me learning how to paint and trying a bunch of other stuff. So when I actually did come back to comics, I had a lot more to bring to it, and I was inspired again. At the time, it felt like a failure, but it turned out to just be an opportunity. And in some ways, like last year when I fell down on working on what was going to become a new issue 1, that ended up being an opportunity to play around with the 3D stuff in animation, which has now led to doing a short film. So things that look like failures turn out to not be failures. They just turn out to be opportunities for trying something else.
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way, whether it's as a comic writer or an animation individual or something along that creative line. Maybe you've inspired them in some way, shape, or form. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
Well, I do like the idea of paying forward. I mean, for me, what I like to always do is share the sort of stuff that I wish somebody had told me. I'm always willing to share about process. I'm welcoming of students to like come in and visit my studio or go. I went to a high school on Thursday just to go bring my work and share. I just think being open and sharing what you're doing at any point along your path. When I was just doing comics for a couple of years, I started doing this sort of thing. So it's just where I go and share to students. I think just be encouraging, share what you're doing. I absolutely don't think of generations coming up behind me as being competition. I think them as being the people who are gonna like bring more cool stuff into the world, and that if I can pass a few tools on to help them make something cool too, then that's worthwhile. That means that the things that I'm doing don't go to waste. I mean, it's not just about the work that I've made. It's how can I pass on what I've been learning throughout my career.
If your life was a comic book or a movie, what would its title be? And what would its soundtrack be?
Oh, well, I was actually toying with this after I did the Kickstarter and I was going to do the book launch. I had put together a little slideshow that I called Zen and the Art of Werewolves, which, I suppose if I were to ever write a memoir, that might be. What would the soundtrack be like? Well, my literal sound, the soundtrack of my actual life is filled with like Irish and Scottish trad music because that's what I play. But I don't know if that would necessarily fit. Like I have playlists that kind of line up with the various phases of my life. So like there's like kind of like this like these mixtapes that my friends gave me in high school that like I totally associate that stuff with what was going on when I was in high school. And it was things like Metallica and REM and Joe Satriani, which is probably a guitarist you've never heard of, and he's still awesome. And then in college, it would be all things like Weezer and, Green Day and stuff like that. And then getting on into like the early days when I was doing Paradigm Shift, it would be things like Radiohead and Depeche Mode and things like that. And these days, I'm all over the place.
Well, Dirk, I do hate to say, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, and this has been great. I've had a really good time.
Oh, good. This makes up for that last non-interview that we had.
Yes, I remember you called me an auteur, and I that stuck with me.
Oh, good. I'm glad my verbose vocabulary worked out really well when I was trying to sound smarter than I was.
I mean, it was like accurate. That's accurate.
Okay. Before I let you go, where can we find you? How can we support you? Of course, your website, social medias, and everything like that. We can help see your amazing future that you've created so far.
Well, thank you. I mean, most of my work you can find at paradigmshiftmanga.com. Intermittently, when I have things I like to share, I'm on Twitter at Dirk TD. I'm on Instagram at Dirk I TD, which don't ask. And please, if you'd like behind the scenes things, go to the website, sign up for my mailing list, because I post extra things there. So especially behind the scenes stuff, because I like sharing process. That's one of my favorite things. Yeah, please come check it out.
Like I said, that is this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview and about 1,200 plus others on our website, tgtmedia.com or twogeekstalking.com. That's the word two, T-O-W, not the number two. Website's going through a revamp because I am only one person. Go to our YouTube channel, which is a lot more updated, which is youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast is back after 12 or so years as well, too, because other reasons, which is twogeekstalking.podbean.com, or just search for Two Geeks Talking on your favorite audio podcast service. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.